Hello all, Anthony Wilson, your Public Information Officer for the City of San Angelo. And today we're going to be recapping a budget workshop that we conducted earlier this morning with the City Council. So joining us are two of our City Councilmen, City Councilman Tom Thompson, City Councilman Tommy Hiebert. Thank you guys for being with us.
Oh, thank you for having us.
So Tom, I wanted to start off with you. It was interesting to me, sales tax collections right now are trending to almost record levels. And yet the City Council decided during the budget workshop today to budget in the coming year a 1.5% decrease from where those actuals are projected to land at the end of this fiscal year. Why do you think that was a good decision to sort of scale back on the amount of sales tax collections that you're going to budget?
Well, there's a difference between actual and forecasting. And you will have to, and I think you can look at the bench up there and see that we're all we take our assignment as a council person very seriously. I was actually in favor of like a 3% decrease because you know what? We can't predict what's going to happen next year. We don't know if the oil market's going to be great. We don't know if we're going to be sitting on the edge of the perimeter of the energy sector. We had good growth this year. And coming from a sales history, what's bad about good growth is now you have history of having good growth. We're not saying that those numbers aren't going to be there, but is the growth going to be there? So I think it's very prudent of our entire council to go forward and say, you know what, let's not overguess this. And so, it doesn't go in the budget, and just because you put it there doesn't mean you have to use it.
So some of us have lived through, Anthony, being on the opposite side of what Tom's talking about on the downside. I served on a city board where we had to decrease our budget mid-year by a sizable amount because of lack of sales tax revenue. So I agree with Tom. The prudent thing to do is likely to do the 3%, but in my opinion, going with 1.5% with the trend that we are seeing is still a conservative number.
And so it's an old budgeting axiom. You want to budget revenues conservatively and maybe expenditures liberally so that you come out in the black at the end of the fiscal year.
Yes.
Oh, absolutely. And I think some people miss it. We have to have a balanced budget. Okay, we can't go forward and say we've got a greater amount of expenses than we do revenue. I mean, legally we can't do that. So I think a lot of people miss the picture. Is today we took some actuals for a couple months that aren't in yet and played a lot of math, but we just did that to make sure we hit the number right.
Councilman Hiebert, conversely, property tax revenue is projected to increase at a fairly meager 1.7%. Were you surprised by that number?
Yes, I was. I suppose you saved that question for me since I asked that question. I was surprised by that because I remember last year's number, at least I thought I did, at being, let's just say somewhat higher, but maybe in the whole scheme of things significantly higher than what we saw this year. So when the question was asked, the staff said, yes, it is in fact a decrease from what we have seen in the past because historically we've seen 3 to 4% increase in those valuations. So obviously that means more tax revenue for us. So that's a conversation that we probably need to have going forward with multiple parties. Is everything as it should be? I'm not suspicious that it's not, but it's just one of those things that then impacts how we budget when we don't have the revenue that we have historically had. So we had to I'll say, make some adjustments in the way that we looked at things because the revenue wasn't there.
It almost seems a little counterintuitive because when you look around the community, you see buildings popping up and you see development going on, and so you would just anticipate that the tax roll might have grown a little more.
Well, and they gave us some numbers today that new construction was not as great, added to the tax rolls this past year was not as great as it was in the previous year. So obviously that's going to generate less revenue for you. Businesses that have come to town are using existing buildings, not building new buildings. So that is going to impact. Obviously, we want the business, we want that tax base to grow, but it hasn't created as much added value to our tax rolls as it has in past years.
Interestingly, I thought a lot of the new initiatives in this proposed budget, it's not yet an approved budget yet, but the proposed budget are very similar to what we had in the current year's plan, and that included more police officers, it included pay raises for city employees, and potentially some more firefighters. So Councilman Thompson, there was a proposal to increase the SAPD's force by 5 officers this year after doing that same number last year. Why are you supportive of that initiative?
You know, public safety, you can't ever put in my mind, you can't put a dollar on it, but you have to be responsible for what we do with our money. And listening to Chief Carter this morning, we talked about adding the 5 last year. He actually went into a detailed conversation about, because of attrition of officers leaving things, he only netted 1 out of that last year. Okay, so while it's there, bringing on another 5, he's got a target. And I hate to say we try to benchmark with other cities, but there are indices throughout the United States of we want to have 1.6 policemen per 1,000 people, or some people, I think the FBI puts out a number of like 1.75 or 7.9. Frank's trying to get 1.65, and I see that, and I think he's making some changes this year of where he wants to go and get his group as a department, and I will support that. But you know what? We're going to hold them accountable for that. This is what they've came to us. There's no meet and confer anymore. We're going to go with this. And I mean, there'll be some scrutiny and there'll still be a lot of discussion over that. But I see no problem, given the intent today, to support what we have and go forward. Let's try to make it where it needs to be.
Too, Anthony, just to augment what Tom has said, when you think of really what you get for your city taxes that we all pay through either our house payment or just directly, you think really number one of public safety, police and fire, and then you think of your streets. So it is a very core service. And to just tag along what Tom said, the 1.65, the 1.75, there are standards that are good to at least look at to make sure that we are protecting the citizens adequately. That's our job, not to protect them, but to make sure that the police department has what they need to protect us.
And one of my favorite budget facts is that all of the property taxes collected by the city of San Angelo are not sufficient in order to pay for the police and the fire departments. I don't think people realize that all the monies that they pay and sometimes complain about paying in property taxes isn't enough to cover the cost of that core service.
We saw that graph, that pie chart this morning that clearly showed that. Yes, it does not. So people, rightly so, are concerned about what they pay in property taxes, but every single penny they pay in their ad valorem property tax goes to pay for police and fire.
Now, the plan that y'all discussed this morning also calls for pay raises, average of 4% for police officers and 2% merit raises for civilian employees. Councilman Hiebert, why do you like that plan?
It, in fact, accomplishes some goals that the police chief had, that the fire department as a department overall, not I would say unanimously, but overall supported, and it does, let's just say, help our general fund employees. So with the recommendations that came to us via the chief, I am quite certain in conversations with folks in his department and then the fire department, they said, here's what we recommend. That's the reason I could support that.
You mentioned about the firefighters. They had a really interesting situation where they agreed as an association, a union, if you will, to have all of the money allocated for their raises go to the top 3 ranks, that is lieutenant and then captain and then battalion chief. Where currently those salaries among those 3 ranks are really compressed. So that means the lowest 2 ranks get no raises at all, even though they got raises of 9 and 10% last year. What did you guys think of that proposal that came from the firefighters themselves?
Well,
I will say the numbers that Brian put out, roughly 171 in that department, 35 of them are getting a raise, the balance of them are not. There has to be a lot of collective agreement for a group that where 80% of it is not getting anything, still agrees to move forward with it. So what that showed me was a lot of faith in the leadership by everybody. Collectively, that group has said, this is what we want to do. But you nailed it, Anthony. There were some people last year that got some changes and improvements, and they understood that this year they weren't going to get it. what amazed me was when we talked to some of them during the break, they're like, yeah, there's going to be a couple people that are not satisfied with this, but overall, right at 80% of us, are content with what we proposed.
Tom and I were standing there, and we had one of the firefighters literally walk up to us and told us exactly what he did. He was not in the group that was going to get the raise this year, and he said clearly to us, "I'm okay with that." He said,
"Absolutely,
y'all took care of us last year." He said, "I am good with this." So,
well, the interesting thing about that to me was it was actually very selfless, I thought, and I thought it struck. It achieved equity, if not equality, for everybody involved. So I agree.
That's well said. That's exactly what it did. And that's a plan they've been on for a while. And what you're seeing is that plan working over time, and it's going forward. And I think Chief Carter's trying to work something similar to where maybe we get the same parity and like program as it moves forward.
So the council, however, was much more cautious about adding firefighters with the help of a federal grant. You talked about that during the workshop, Councilman Thompson. What gave you pause about that?
You look at the SAFER grant, it's a matching grant. So our first grant's $150,000 the first year, $150,000 again the second year. But when you get to like year 3, and correct me if I'm wrong, it's like $363,000, $366,000, and then so we're actually making projections about what could be happening in year 3, 4, and beyond. That's a pretty big chunk of money. I mean, we're talking as it will expand and raise its salary. I mean, it'll near $750,000. I'm not comfortable saying yeah to that right now. I'm just not, and I don't know if that's right or wrong, but the conservative side of me will say, let's not roll that dice right now.
So I'm going to play devil's advocate for a second. If I were a firefighter, I might say, yeah, but you added 5 more police officers and it's the same sort of situation. How would you respond to that?
As you look at PD and fire department, you see each one of them doing their own steps with their path that they're going. There's some things that we get from Medicaid for the ambulance runs that we have. As you go forward with it, you think each one's chosen their different path. They've pushed that to us and brought it up, and staff has said this is the way we're going. I don't know right or wrong, and I think to sit back, hindsight and Monday morning quarterback here in a year will be easy to say. But right now, fire department was happy with what they had. And I didn't see a lot of push for the SAFER grant, and that's kind of where I left it. I was just like, I'm not going to stir that one because I think people that know their business and know their department probably know it better than I do.
Now, as I mentioned, the document has not been approved yet. It's still in a proposal, if you will, and the council is going to hold a public hearing on this proposed budget next Tuesday on September the 4th before considering adoption on September the 18th.
correct.
At that September 4th meeting, citizens can come and share their thoughts about the proposed budget. Are you expecting any changes to that document over the next 3 weeks or so?
I'm going to say candidly, I am not, unless we have something that is, let's just say, very dramatic in the way of a decrease in expenditure, in the way of an, let's just say, found new source of revenue. I really don't think it would change much, if any, Anthony.
I think we were there at the end discussing tooth or nail over 41,000 on the lower side to 7,000 on the positive side. And I don't see a lot changing when you compare that as a percentage of, how much is 50,000, a percentage of that compared to 74 million. It's not a lot. There were some things that are important to me. I think there's things important to Tommy, but I was like looking at the health care coverage. What percentage are we going to do? And you know what? Some of these targets are still moving targets. Lisa Marley talked about changes in
our HR director.
Yes, our HR director. Sorry, talked about changes in the prescription program that may save us considerable amount of money. You know what? We won't know that till this afternoon. So I hope the changes that we see September 4th are very favorable for everybody involved. I want us to be consistent of how we treat all of the employees.
And so again, that meeting will be open to the public on Tuesday, September the 4th. If you can't make it, we'd love for you to watch on our Facebook page. And if you'd like to check out the proposed document, you can do that on our website. Just go to cosatx.us/budget.